This is the Pub Test. Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of the Pub Test. My name is Neil Farrow and I'm here with my co-host Erin Watson. And we're doing a little bit of a recap of an episode. So we were very lucky that we recently recorded an episode talking about the royal family. And of course, a lot has changed for the royal family in the past week. In fact, it was the prince formerly known as Prince Andrew, now known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who on his birthday on the 19th of February, which is also my birthday, I must say, was arrested and spent 11 or 12 hours in jail. And so this little recap is touching base on all of the things that Andrew has gotten up to in the previous couple of years and the last week in particular. But we kick this off with a bit of reflections from Erin, who, when we recorded the episode on the royal family, was definitely in a fangirl moment over the contribution the royal family has made. Now, Erin, has your opinion changed given the last week with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor?
I'm not sure that it was about being a fangirl over the contribution of the royal family. I think it was a fangirl mostly over the fashion choices and sartorial choices of the royal family, and my obsession with the royal fashion Instagram algorithm. I don't know if you've got down that rabbit hole yet, Neil, but my general. The reason I know what's going on with the royal family is 110% to do with the royal fashion. I love it. I think it's fascinating. Every little piece is chosen in such a particular way. I think, that's my love of the royal family versus their contribution over time
to civil society. So look, one of my favourite photos appeared in the past week, obviously off the back of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor being arrested. This is a familiar photo for the royal family, and we'll make sure we include it on the YouTube link and online, because it seems there's a number of British, including Prince Andrew's father, who was caught in a similar pose, as was Theresa May, I think, and a variety of others. So it's a uniquely British pose when people are clearly in trouble. So let's do a little bit of a recap, first of all, of the history of royal family members being arrested, beheaded, and everything in between. So obviously we had Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. As a good Republican, I'm having a little sniggle in the background, but he was not the first royal family member to actually be in trouble with the law. We've had a number of royal family members, including Charles I, King Edward II, even Princess Anne has had a bump in with the law over the period of time, as has Prince Philip. But interestingly enough, one of the more Australian connections to Prince Andrew or Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's recent arrest was on a visit when he was here a number of years ago. Now, he was travelling from Australia to New Zealand, and of course our good airport security staff insisted that he undertake a security screening, to which he refused. Now, he was then politely told that if he is not screened, he will not be boarding the aircraft. A slight kerfuffle later, and he finally submitted or was opted in to allow the security screening to take place, and his flight continued, albeit slightly delayed. So even with an Australian connection, we have the prince formerly known as Andrew, who has been in trouble with the law. But recapping over time, the most interesting relatively recent run-in with the law was actually Princess Anne. So Princess Anne was given a speeding offence at the age of 21. And again, 5 years later, another speeding offence. Having not learned the lesson the first time, she was actually banned from driving on top of her fine for the second occasion. So Princess Anne has definitely had a few run-ins with the law, but none of them seem to be of the level of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Now, Erin, would you like to give us any bit of a recap as to what happened with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor on his birthday last?
I think everyone was shocked by what happened, not because that he didn't deserve it or anything like that, but because of the circumstances under which he was arrested. Because I find with this whole Epstein thing, there's a bit of irony that the only person in prison over this is a woman. Epstein has been able to take the perhaps easier road out of this. And so when Prince Andrew was arrested, I thought it was quite interesting. So it relates to what happened while he was in a government appointment, right? So we had this trade envoy role. So as a royal, very difficult to arrest him for anything he's done wrong as a royal, but this was like a way to wedge him and to actually have some kind of consequences by using this time as trade envoy. And I think what's happened is he's sent documents to Jeffrey Epstein while he was in that role, confidential documents. So that's the bit that they have been able to wedge him on. And it just seems that the unraveling from here is getting worse and worse and worse. Like, I was looking at the papers this morning, and, it looks like, London police or what are they called?
Scotland Yard, was it?
Protection
Or
officers. Protection officers, that's
protection
right. Because
officer?
I think their status is international protected people. Like, I know Kate Middleton, because, again, I've been reading Royal Fashion. I was reading about her international protection status, is the only reason I know this. And so there were officers who actually guarded a party in New York with Jeffrey Epstein. So, I think that now it's like that arrest kind of gives permission for a lot of this stuff to really unravel. And it's interesting, the reflection you had on the time that Epstein was asked to go through, former Prince Andrew was asked to go through security in Australia, because conversely, if you look at the way that the King has responded, he's basically saying everyone is equal under the law, as is everybody equal under the law of whatever the law is for airport security. And it just goes to show that entitlement and that difference between Prince Andrew and King Charles. Although King Charles might not even, we don't know what he's thinking right now, but he has no choice, because the royal family is probably at their absolute weakest point right now because of Prince Andrew.
And so a lot of this, Erin, as you've alluded to, has sort of kind of come undone off the back of the Epstein files. So specifically, this charge relates to the fact that there was a mass dumping of documents by Donald Trump in the US. A fair number of them were redacted. Still curious to know what's in those redacted documents. Yep. But the BBC actually picked together that through those files, there was a number of emails and correspondence back and forth between Epstein and then the time Prince Andrew, while he was acting in a trade envoy capacity. And so sort of the Epstein files is this kind of gift that keeps on giving for the media around endless stories, endless connections. Obviously, we've seen with Prince Andrew, the forced banishment, the removal of his titles. There's now a discussion as to whether he should be removed from the chain of
the line of succession. Because he's still number 8. Yes, even though he's not a prince, he's still number 8 in the line of succession, which is baffling.
And that would actually require Australia to legislate as well, I discovered over the weekend. So every country that has the king or queen as head of state would have to do its own legislation to adjust the line of succession, which is an interesting local connection and potentially an argument here for why Australia should potentially cut its ties with the royal family and keep the Governor-General or an equivalent.
If there was a political moment, Neil, absolutely, because what you'll have, if there's legislation that has to be changed, there's still a whole bunch of monarchists in Parliament. There's a whole bunch of Republicans in Parliament. It will become a political issue if there's legislative change. Like, I don't think it's something that the government can just walk through Parliament and then it's got to go through the Senate. So we'll walk through the lower house and the Senate and then back again. If there ever was, because I think when we initially talked about the royal family, we were like, is Australia going to be a republic? Absolutely not. It's just the wrong time. It's not bipartisan, all of this kind of stuff. But if there ever was a moment to wedge this issue through the Australian Parliament, that's probably going to be it. Because why are we sort of, yes, on one hand, it gets rid of Andrew, but then it would be that existential question for Australians about, well, why do we even have a royal family in the first place? So, it's funny how things can change very, very quickly. What do you think? Do you reckon there'd be enough public sentiment to kind of get something like that through?
Look, I think it's an interesting one, particularly off the back of obviously the lack of success we've had with constitutional change in Australia and sort of would there be enough impetus to do more? I think it'll be interesting, obviously, if this goes to trial, and it's going to be quite a substantial crime to charge against. So the threshold is relatively high for this particular offence. So it'll be an interesting one, but even the court case and the potential damage that will flow from there. But I think it has been an evolution, and you alluded to Charles's comments, King Charles, over the evolution of what is known previously as sovereign immunity or royal immunity. where previously they were all untouchable, and now it's looking like Charles's response is probably more in line with the times. Nobody's actually above the law, but it does create some unprecedented legal jeopardy. So, as you've noted, he's already eighth in line to the throne. Not that we're anticipating any sort of mass events that would adjust that, but if there was a catastrophic event, he could potentially be the king of England relatively soon, if that were to occur. And obviously, that has severe implications because he would then get royal immunity. So look, I think is the
Then
groundswell.
we'd be a republic, Neil.
I was going to say that would definitely tip us into republic territory very, very quickly. I'm not sure the groundswell is there yet, but it will be interesting to see sort of does it continue to build. And I think King Charles has tried his best to hemorrhage the bleeding from the royal family and the black brand, but who knows where this will end.
And they've got to, I think one of the things that I found really interesting over the last few days is just how, they're going with the business as usual approach. So he put out that statement, then he went to a big fashion event, maybe it's London Fashion Week or something like that. But of course, fashion, that's why I saw it. So he went to this it was a Vogue event from memory. It was like on Friday, whatever day it was. And then you'll see that Kate and William went to the BAFTAs for the first time in several years as well. So then the front page of the paper automatically becomes Kate's outfit and what Kate is wearing and the two of them together. They know that that's the power that they have over the British media. So it changes the story from Andrew on the front page. And if you just do a very quick Google of Andrew, it is all over every single major newspaper everywhere and all of the analysis that comes from that. So a big conversation is obviously about Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, who are the daughters who are, have been horrifically treated through this as well. And then, but should they face consequences? I also can't help, now I haven't seen analysis to this effect yet, but I also can't help but wonder if part of, someone like Harry's little gripe and wanting to get away from being funded by the British public, by the British public and others, is that, has he done something wrong, or he knew about all of this and he was like, I want nothing to do with these people because I know how bad it's going to be.
And Harry's made some interesting comments in relation to his uncle Andrew. In the book The Spare, he discusses the contrast between the fact that, Andrew was embroiled in the Epstein saga, was dealing with or close to quite a few nefarious characters, and yet still kept his security detail. And just because Harry wanted to leave, being an active royal, he lost his security detail. So Harry's actually been very sharp historically around talking about the differences there, but has been very quiet on this issue. So to your point there, is it a no, or did he want to know, or sort of why is Harry so quiet?
I reckon he probably knew. I mean, I don't think that this could have happened at that scale without him knowing, and without, because he was very close to one of the daughters as well. There were often pictures of her going to visit them in Canada and the US. So I think that they absolutely probably did know, and he's pointing out the hypocrisy, but he's not telling you the full story in Spare. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, we were all there to hear about Meghan, but most of it is to do with his service in the military, which is quite interesting to read about. He's quite, open and stuff there. And I don't know. I feel like he can't have not known, and that's probably part of what made them so angry, is how much Andrew was protected, because Andrew, as we all know, was the Queen's favourite
son.
Meg asked me one night, "You don't think they'll ever pull our security, do you?" Never. Not in this climate of hate, and not after what happened to my mother. Also, not in the wake of my Uncle Andrew. He was embroiled in a shameful scandal, accused of the sexual assault of a young woman, and no one had so much as suggested that he lose his security. Whatever grievances people had against us, sex crimes weren't on the list.
Someone did write in the papers the other day, and I think it might have been Latika Burke or someone like that, wrote that, you're still not allowed to quite criticise the Queen. It's a little bit of out of fashion and out of taste to do that. However, she did do a lot of protecting of Andrew. And the only reason I think that all of this is unravelling now is partly maybe because she's not here, and King Charles is allowing it to happen, because there are a lot of things that they could do to stop this. But he is sort of giving permission for rule of law to take its course. And as you say, that's partly about modernising. They have to kind of move with the times. If they're seen to be above the law, then it is off with their heads.
And is it a history of Charles's? So Charles I was the first monarch arrested, executed, I think, in the end. His son, Charles II, re-established the Merry Monarch, but was quite a ladies' man, for want of a better term. Numerous mistresses, the reopening of theatres, witty and hedonistic. And now we have Charles III on the throne, continuing that line. So it'll be an interesting story to see how everything goes. But on this occasion, would you have a beer or would you catch up with the prince formerly known as Prince Andrew, now Mountbatten Windsor? Here's an interesting one for you.
Plot twist, Neil. I think most times throughout this podcast, it doesn't matter who the dictator is, doesn't matter who the war criminal is. I kind of don't. I really, really don't. I don't want to have a beer with him. I think he's clearly a very awful person. And I think that he's been protected in ways that are just, it really goes to the power of rich and connected men around the world. And I'm sorry, but that's, yes, there's Ghislaine Maxwell involved in this as well. So, but it does go to show the connections of rich and powerful. And I would just be my skin would crawl having a beer with him.
Yeah.
Total cringe. I actually think I got invited to one of the Pitch at Palace events when it was in Australia, and I couldn't go for some reason. And I'm so glad I never did because ew. And I just, I really, that he's probably, look, I think I'd have a beer with Putin. I'd have a beer with Kim Jong-un. Because there's a different side to the story. We discussed that previously. There's no other side to this story. You're a bad person. Neil, are you going to have a beer with Andrew? I think this is
in what is a pub test first, both of us thumbs down for a beer with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. So yeah, definitely does not pass the pub test. I'm sure we'll be speaking and hearing more about this as it continues to drag into the weeks and months ahead. Do definitely support on this occasion Charles's very strong response that nobody is above the law. Our topics for this week's podcast, we're doing a deep dive into South Australia. South Australia obviously has an election coming up on the 21st of March this year. We are touching on the monarchy and what it means for Australia, and is it relevant despite it being persistent? And then we're going to dive into a topic that's actually really close to both Erin and I, and it's how we originally met, which is the state of relationships and a little bit more on the geopolitics of India. So diving into this week's episode, we're going to touch base on South Australia. Now, Erin has already told me in advance she's not an expert in South Australia, so we're going to take her snapshots and stories over what is and isn't in South Australia as we dive into a little bit more about South Australia. Now, I know Erin was probably being very coy in saying she knows little about South Australia, but Erin, what's your connection, if any, to South Australia? What do you know about the election? Let's roll us into South Australia here.
Ooh, key connection to South Australia, definitely the wine.
The wine? Which wine region are we talking here?
Well, obviously the Barossa, but also I've never been. So again, I just, my experience with South Australian wines have been largely through the local wine shop.
They also have the McLaren Vale as well.
McLaren Vale. Have you been?
I've been to both. I've also
Have you been to the Virgin Lounge at Adelaide Airport?
I have not.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Really?
Yeah, it's really good. It's one of the best ones in Australia. It's really kind of leaning into the whole soft power of the wineries and the food and that kind of stuff. So there's beautiful wines in there. That's a big bar area. It's really nice.
South Australia has their election coming up and it is currently a Labor government. The Labor government in South Australia by Malinauskas. I can never pronounce that correctly. But he's the Labor Premier. And if polling is any indication, there's a very slight, potentially more than slight potential that the opposition party in South Australia could be the Greens or One Nation, because the Liberal Party's polling there is so diabolical. We'll know the outcome very, very soon. But let's do some quick check as to the fast facts of how the parliament works in South Australia. So South Australia has a 47-seat House of Assembly or lower house and a 22-seat Legislative Council in the upper election. So again, it's one of these bicameral systems of parliament. In the lower house or the House of Assembly, Labor has 28 votes, the opposition has 13, and there's a crossbench of 6. And in the Legislative Council, Labor doesn't quite have a majority. So it has 9 in the Legislative Council, an opposition of 7 and a crossbench of 6. So obviously not a majority in the upper house in South Australia. But they do have a working majority in the lower house. And Malley, as he's known, probably one of the more sort of centrist Labor leaders we have across Australia, similar to Minns, coming from sort of the right or the more central side of the Labor Party. But they do have an election and the polling is looking dire for the Liberal Party.
They are, yes. And so Anthony Green actually called this election as the great, it will be a challenge to Mark McGowan's greatest ever win and majority in a state election or something to that effect, which would have been when there were only 2 Liberal members elected to Parliament in Western Australia. So that is pretty bad if Anthony Green is saying that for South Australia. Obviously, the leader of the opposition recently resigned, Vincent Tarzia. He was talking about having a young family, which he did. Like, he has a very small baby and another child.
With the two-party preferred vote of 66%, it was pretty sad for him running at 34% on 2PP.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, really dire in South Australia. And look, there's some good candidates there, and we've now got a female leader in South Australia, which does replicate this broader trend with the Liberals across New South Wales, Victoria, federally and South Australia. And so I guess the question is, can Ashton, who is the new Liberal leader, can she turn it around? It's a big ship to turn around. What's interesting, though, is we do seem to have these trends of in state parliaments, Liberals being absolutely wiped out when they are wiped out. Like the wave against the incumbent is just so bad. Not even the incumbent, because in Western Australia, Mark McGowan was already in. But, you know, it's like people are really losing. They're not just losing, they're like really losing, which is an interesting thing you've got to sort of claw your way back from. We've seen Liberals do a little bit of that in Western Australia. But how bad is this going to get? I mean, how bad is the polling? I heard that, you know, they might not have any seats at all.
So why is this? This is your party, so you're obviously not the same state, but, you know, why is the Liberal Party going full crazy in South Australia?
Are they going full crazy? I don't know if they're going full crazy. I just think that they're obviously not very popular. I mean, if you look at South Australia, sort of similar to Victoria, I guess, historically it really is a Labor state. And I think, now I don't know if I've got my numbers right here, but when the Liberals won the election previously, it was after about 16 years of a Labor government. And so inevitably in our system, we do have those swings and roundabouts and cycles, and then, you know, the Liberals will come in for a term. So clearly there's something going on there. That this is a pretty Labor state traditionally, and then the Liberals get a bit of a turn, and then it's back to Labor again. And Malinauskas.
Who knows?
Spider in front of me. Sorry.
That's all right.
You can put that in the podcast. It's too much. A little spider.
A little spider in front of the microphone.
So with Peter Malinauskas in South Australia, he's wildly popular. I think if we could go back to one of our previous podcasts about keeping fit, he's one of those as well.
He does. In last election, he appeared
goes to his local footy club or something.
No, he appeared taking his kid for a swim in the pool, and that's kind of like where that kicked off. So.
Although also it's so interesting because when we see a male premier take his kid to, you know, go swim, it's like, oh my gosh, I love that. That's so good. He's such a great dad. If Jess Wilson was doing that with her beautiful son, I 100% bet people would come out and go, oh,
is she wearing?
No, not that. Is she capable of winning this election? As you know, she's got a young family. She's a mum. Can she really do this? So there are these unequal standards between men and women in politics.
Yeah. So look, South Australia is an interesting one. As they like to tell us, and I'm sure South Australians will, it was the first free settlement in Australia. So the rest of us were all apparently
convict-free
states.
Does that explain the posh accent?
Potentially. What is it? Yogurt and dance and
France. But Western Australians do that too. That's not just exclusively South Australian. They say dance in France.
There you go. It's an interesting one. But as you said, Food and Wine Powerhouse, the Virgin Lounge, obviously part of that. Festival state and produces 70% of the world's opals, it was also the first place to decriminalise homosexuality and the inventor of the heels hoist. Some
that's a good
bits and
one.
pieces. Now, I have a heels
You
hoist.
do have one. I noticed that before. I thought,
The first thing I installed, even before my house was built in Kyneton, I had a heels hoist in the yard, reaching back to my younger years, hanging off them, although I'm not sure a heels hoist would hold my weight these days. So South Australia is unique in the Australian landscape, very concentrated city. We've spoken in previous podcasts about states like Queensland being quite diverse population-wise and as in spread out from Brisbane. South Australia is very concentrated, I think even potentially more so than Western Australia, and the majority of their population is really in Adelaide. And it's got a beautiful kind of layout with parkland surrounding the city centre, which does make it quite unique as well. The Libs are definitely clearly on the nose there in South Australia. And it's interesting, to your point earlier that, Labor's, it tends to be a Labor state. It's interesting that whether we talk about Canberra, whether we talk about Victoria, whether we talk about South Australia, that have been Labor states or territories for quite a while, it shows that when the Liberals get into government in those jurisdictions, they're usually the more moderate, socially progressive Liberals. So, the ACT was under Kate Carnell. We've seen in Victoria, whether it was Jeff Kennett or sort of under Baillieu and, I've forgotten, Napthine was the other one in Victoria. We've seen they're typically more sort of centrist Liberals and the same in South Australia, recognising that a lot of social reform in Australia has come out of South Australia historically. So what's your take on this? Being a good moderate Lib, what's your take as to the lesson in South Australia for the Liberal Party and perhaps their pivots right or left?
I think you've picked up on a really good point there about more moderate Liberals winning in these sort of traditionally Labor states, right? So if you even look at Victoria, where the Liberals do hold seats in a very, very Labor state, at a state level tend to be in those teal federal electorates, right? So, if you look at Kooyong, Monique Ryan still holds that seat as a teal, but if you look within that electorate, you've got seats like Kew. Same with down in Sandringham, which obviously has now swung back to Liberal in Goldstein. But I find that quite an interesting dynamic, and often the Liberals talk about, we've lost our base and the base has moved. It's in Melton. It's no longer in Kooyong. I actually fundamentally disagree, because you can look at the state level politics and go, well, actually, those voters are still here because the Liberals retain state seats in a way that they're not retaining them at the federal level. So maybe there's the same sort of lesson over in South Australia. Again, I'm not 100% sure on the politics of individual candidates over there, but if you're looking at it like
being kicked out, I think they're all very right wing over in South Australia in the Liberal Party.
And so my point there is, if you take the Victorian lesson, well, actually, perhaps teal style, very moderate, centrist, Liberal members are popular with people, and they will be able to vote them in. I mean, Kooyong almost flipped as well with Amelia Hamer at a federal level. But if you look at that with that overlay, you can kind of tell that the voters are still there, because they're still voting for Jess Wilson. They're still voting for Brad Roswell when that was a teal seat for with Zoe Daniel. So the voters are there. It's perhaps the policy positions that are wrong.
So as
not the voters who are wrong.
As we round out, I don't even know the opposition leader for South Australia, but I'd definitely be up for a gym, swim, or anything in between with Mally as the premier over there. And I do genuinely think he is passing the pub test politically. Like, South Australia is a way better place now than it was sort of 4 years ago, and I enjoy my trips over there every single time. So it's a yes to both the government passing the pub test and hopefully winning this next election, and also catching up with Mally for a social drink. Who's the leader of the opposition over there?
Ashton Hurn.
Ashton Hurn, there you go.
You don't even know.
No, how bad is that?
And you know what? We live in an era.
How long has she been there?
Doesn't matter.
Oh.
Doesn't matter. I love her. Go, I don't even know what her name is. Her name is Ashton Hurn. Before COVID era, I reckon most people didn't know who premiers were. It was really only during COVID that became really apparent, because because there was so much leadership that was required and involved from our premiers, and also we got really cranky at some of them. And so everybody knew who Gladys Berejiklian was, everyone knew who Mark McGowan was, everyone knew who Anastasia Palaszczuk was, everyone knew who Dan Andrews was. And so we started that the politics of states became a lot more prevalent. And I think it's kind of stuck around a bit. I actually think in a way that it wasn't before. And so, yes, we should know Ashton Hurn's name.
She's only 34. I've just Googled that. Very, very young.
Well, you might say that she's young, but is she really? I mean, maybe in terms of today's politics, but if you look back historically, politicians, particularly when they were men, were younger.
That's it.
Right. So again, we have this double standard because this happened with Jess Wilson in Victoria. Everyone said, oh, no, she's too young. She's too inexperienced. But when you look at her experience, she is perfect for politics. I mean, her background in business, her background in policy, her background in politics, she's got a heavyweight political CV. But if it was a 35-year-old man, we're not going to be like, oh, they're too inexperienced or this and that, whatever. Again, we've talked already on this particular episode about this double standard. I'm surprised we haven't talked about it more, actually. But, she's this Ashton Hurn is 35. She's like solidly in, a middle of her career.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, less than 1 in 4 parliamentarians are aged 45 or under. And the average age of politicians in Australia is mid-50s. But South Australia also has a very, very young senator.
Is that the 21-year-old? She'd be bringing down the average,
Who would absolutely bring down the average. And obviously Wyatt Roy from the Liberal Party.
He was very young.
Very young when he was first
Baby
elected.
of the house, they get called.
Are you having...
Oh, yeah. I'm going to have like a nice McLaren Vale glass of wine with Ashton Hurn.
Shiraz, Cab Sav. What are we having in?
Yeah, I'm gonna have a Riesling.
A Riesling. There you go.
A dry Riesling, not a sweet Riesling. I don't like the dry ones. I mean the sweet ones.
Sweet ones. Next on today's episode is diving into something that is quirky and curious.
Curious. Well, there you go.
Quirky and curious. Somehow we can't seem to get rid of the persistence of monarchies. Now, Australia is obviously a constitutional monarchy. The king is our head of state. And, God save the Queen, as it was then, used to be our national anthem, clearly no longer. And we all had a little bit of a chuckle when we had to change, the lawyers became King's Counsels as opposed to Queen's Counsels. And, more recently when the former head of state, Queen Elizabeth, passed away and handed over to King Charles III was, all of these things where we still have a connection to the monarchy. Now, interestingly, the monarchy is often adored by the right and dismissed by the left, not necessarily always, but, the big question asked, and there's a great book on this called God Save the Queen, The Strange Persistence of Monarchies. It really looks into why monarchies continue to exist. And his argument in this is, in the era of autocratic populism, we have more and more dictators and autocrats the worldwide. Does the constitutional monarchy provide safeguards against the megalomania of political leaders? One can only look to the US and Europe at the moment to see sort of some of those megalomaniac political leaders come home to roost. So why do we still have a monarchy in Australia? And on that point, I will disclose I was an active member of the Australian Republican movement for quite a while and did hand out at a very young age, I think I was 13 or 14 at the time, at my local primary school, that's Fadden Primary in Canberra a long time ago, for the yes to Australia becoming a republic. But what's your love or loathe of the king?
Okay, so I have to admit I am a royal tragic, particularly when it comes to fashion. So I follow a bunch of people on Instagram that do commentary on royal fashion. And so they look at all of sort of the sartorial choices that are made. Every little detail of these outfits are thought through. So whether you're Kate Middleton or Princess of Wales, Catherine, I should call her. I should give her.
She's the Princess of Wales.
She is the Princess of Wales. On a tour in Pakistan, every element of her outfit will be from either a previous royal trip or an acknowledgement to an organisation that perhaps they visited in London or things like that. So these sartorial choices are very, very deliberate, and I'm absolutely fascinated with the royal fashion element, which then kind of lent me down a rabbit hole of just kind of being obsessed with the royal women in particular. So I have books at home on royal fashion. There's a great one by a woman named Elizabeth Holmes, not the one in prison, a different one, who sort of really examined those choices over decades between Queen Elizabeth, Princess Diana, Catherine, Princess of Wales now, and then Meghan Markle. I've read books like The Palace Papers by Tina Brown, the Omid Scobie books like Endgame. I read Meet Ella, all about how Ella the dog saved James Middleton's life, because obviously my father, as I mentioned earlier, has an assistance dog. And so the importance of dogs. So I'm right down this rabbit hole and I kind of love it. I love it. I'm obsessed. If you open up my Instagram and when you go to like the search pages and the algorithm pops through, it's just like Kate Middleton, a little bit of Meghan Markle.
But are you a Republican for
That is
Australia?
Not the point. So for me, sustaining this model is all about content and my own entertainment and being obsessed with it. I read Prince Harry's. I've got lots of views on Prince Harry. Anyway, whether I'm a Republican or not.
Monarchy? What's your feelings
I think
here?
Australia is too lazy. I think we are way too lazy to become a republic.
That's a bit harsh.
I know.
I think we just enjoy.
You know what we like?
What we like.
If it's not broken,
don't fix
it. I think that's a very Australian mentality. I think that we're like, it's kind of worked for us, and so. I think your institutionalists, like your Tony Abbotts of the world, that's exactly what he would say. Is this is. I don't know if it's about glorifying or anything like that. It's about saying, but these are the institutions that have served us as a country very, very well. And so therefore, why would you disrupt that? I remember I have a very funny anecdote about meeting Alexander Downer in Argentina many years ago and going for a drink at the Alvear Palace Hotel, which then ended up at the ambassador's residence having dinner, and then I got on a plane and flew home, and it was like, wow, what a day. Anyway, we had a really interesting conversation about sort of colonization, because obviously the Spanish colonies were very different, and the institutions that were left behind
were very different.
Very, very different, or basically absent. So when you look at Argentina and Australia, economically, we were on par. At the start of the last century, they were much richer. So you could argue they were richer.
As I've said in a previous episode, my family after the war split and one branch went to Argentina, and when they went there, they were phenomenally wealthy compared to Australia.
Yeah, and if you go to Buenos Aires, like the buildings are just
stunning.
Oh my gosh, so beautiful. It's kind of like being in Melbourne with these stunning, out with the Gold Rush era buildings. There were,
they've got a very French style in
beautiful.
Buenos Aires.
Oh, it's so French. I absolutely love that place. It's one of my favourite cities on earth, and it just feels so. I've got a lot of nostalgia because it's very far away. So it's actually not. Is it poorly connected? And so anyway, the point is the institutions that were not left behind kind of led Argentina to where they are today economically. I mean, I know that Javier Milei has brought around this sort of new era of the economy and politics, but really throughout the sort of the whole Peronist era, a lot of that was a lack of institutions was the reason why they ended up where they ended up.
Could be providing that stability.
My point is that, with Alexander Downer's point was that with the institutions that you leave behind ends up being this legacy. So if you take that argument, it's not bad, right? Like what we have, we talked about royal commissions earlier. We talked about how lucky we are to be able to have these processes, that we're not like the United States in many ways, which, obviously became independent from the United States, right? So I think that we have, there's a bunch of things that are really good about the monarchy in Australia, depending on, how you look at it. And then there's a whole bunch of other problems as well. And a lot of people think we should be independent and we should be able to, make our own decisions, and we shouldn't be sort of, kowtowing to our king. But how do you go about unpicking it? I'm not sure either. So how do you imagine, how does Australia become, obviously other than the referendum process, how does Australia become a republic?
And there's interestingly, there are 15 Commonwealth realms where King Charles is head of state, including the United Kingdom, obviously Australia, New Zealand, Canada, quite a few others as well, like Jamaica, Papua New Guinea, and some small ones like St. Lucia, St. Kitts Nevis, Solomon Islands.
And they have spent a lot of time deploying the younger royals out to those Caribbean countries in order to shore up, or at least have the departure go lightly, because...
And the departure is an interesting one, because while there's only 15 countries that have the king as head of state, there's 56 countries in the Commonwealth who have still kept some of that connection to the crown.
But is that kind of declining? Because if you think about Commonwealth Games, I mean, that's
People are
really been in
choosing to
decline.
enter the Commonwealth Games.
They are
is
in
bit
decline as a,
But I think
you know.
lots of people are choosing, countries are choosing, even without a British connection, to apply to the Commonwealth, which is a really interesting trend. You know, I think there's been a couple of countries in recent years that have actually applied to join the Commonwealth over similar values, even though they don't have that royal connection. But I'm going to dive into two quick things before we round out the monarchy and dive into India and Australia. Two little facts and figures that I think you've touched on but make things really interesting. So Australia has this tendency of not wanting change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's interesting and topical because we recently had a referendum that failed in relation to The Voice, and we'll have a discussion about The Voice on in an upcoming podcast as well. But interestingly enough, Australia has this history of rejecting referendums, so it makes sort of the move from the monarchy not that much likely. And one of the most interesting ones I reflect upon was in 1988, so our centenary of colonisation year, we had 4 referendums, one on parliamentary terms to provide 4-year maximum terms for both House and Senate, one on fair elections, enshrining fair and democratic elections in the Constitution, one to recognise local government, and one to give us rights and freedoms such as trial by jury, freedom of religion, and stuff like that. And interestingly, that referendum was still rejected. So Australia turned around and said, no, we don't want trial by jury, we don't want freedom of religion, and we don't want local government or fair elections enshrined in our constitution. So there's some quirks around Australia that make the departure of the monarchy probably a much more longer term play. But my favourite thing, as some of you have heard in previous episodes, I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to be a lawyer a long time ago and did law school at the Australian National University, which is a very big public international law school. And I remember reading the Magna Carta, which is one of these kind of foundation documents for liberal democracies, including Australia. We've got one of the copies of the Magna Carta up for display in Canberra. And there was this weird clause in the Magna Carta, and the Magna Carta talks about like big picture concepts of representation and democracy and, you know, taxation and all of this other stuff. And then clause 33 says that the king or queen must remove fishing weirs from the Thames, Medway and other English rivers. And I was like, wow, that's a very unusual
very
clause
specific
for the Constitution. And that was actually the first case of government engagement and lobbying. It was the Fishing Guild versus the Shipping Guild wanted to lobby and advocate, and the Shipping Guild wanted no nets in the river because obviously the nets get caught on ships, and the Fishing Guild wanted lots of fish nets in the river. And who won? It was the Shipping Guild at the time.
The Shipping Guild, but that's kind of a different example of where lobbying came from, because where does the term come from, Neil, is actually in DC, and the idea of hanging around the lobby of the hotel. I know there's one main hotel in DC that I cannot remember the name off the top of my head, but that's where the term to lobby actually comes from. So there you go. But, so if Australia was a republic, would we look like the United States? Is that the kind of model that you aspire to?
I don't think we would ever look like the United States from a political sense. I do think Australia's natural inclination is more towards incrementalism. But, you know, who knows? I was a supporter, obviously, of the ARM, Australian Republican Movement proposal of effectively having a 2/3 majority of Parliament choose our president, as similar countries overseas sort of operate a similar sort of model.
And then we appoint a prime minister. That person appoints a prime minister.
Yeah, then the prime minister is appointed. So effectively, you know, at the moment, realistically, let's kind of cut through the bullshit around it. But effectively, our prime minister appoints the governor general. Now, it's formally done by the king or the queen, but realistically, it's just one person. And my thoughts is, hey, wouldn't it be much better if 2/3 of Parliament appoints? It's therefore not just the prime minister. And it was a pretty simple change without some of that wholesale change. But it's a question to be. But knowing you're a royalist, which members of the royal family both have passed the pub test and which members of the royal family haven't passed the pub test?
I mean, obviously the one that has not passed the pub test is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Yes,
obviously.
His name has changed. His title
I had to really think through that. But Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, absolutely not. But do you know who I would be BFFs with?
Who's this?
Do you think it's going to be Catherine or do you think it's going to be Meghan?
It will definitely be Catherine.
Absolutely,
I think
100%. She's a gazelle. She is just like the most like iconic royal possibly of all time. I mean, think about
but
it, right?
But you're a Republican too, aren't you? On the spot.
I've never really thought of myself as a Republican or not a Republican. However, I am obsessed. And I think that as like an observer of, like, if you think about the royal family as they're inherently political, right? They are totally not political at all, but they are absolutely political. They act politically all the time. If I was to just look at someone like Catherine, she is the one holding that entire shit show together. Really, like she is the steady set of hands. I've thought about this a little bit when, if you think about the end of life for, say, William and Catherine one day, which is inevitable, I can imagine William saying about Catherine that she was my strength and stay, in the same way that Elizabeth said about Prince Andrew, even though he was perhaps a little bit more wild than Catherine, because apparently she barely even touches a drink. I think that, I can really see that kind of characteristic in Catherine. And I think those two, William and Catherine, apparently, according to the books, they have lots of black tie dinners. So if I could come along to one of their black tie dinners, this is like with the Turnip Toffs. Okay, we're getting into the detail, but their friendship group's called the Turnip Toffs.
There you go.
Yes, and I would love to go to one of their dinner parties.
We have a questionably maybe Republican or not, but someone well and truly keen to meet the Princess of Wales.
No, BFFs.
BFFs.
I want to jump all the way to BFFs.
So jumping from the monarchy to another former British realm, and how, interestingly enough, we both met, is India. India is one of my favourite, most quirky, curious, interesting, all of those kind of descriptors at once. One of the largest populations on the planet, 1.4 billion people. Largest democracy, actually, as well. Capital in New Delhi, and pretty large by area sizes as well, around 3.2 million square kilometres. Lots of languages, lots of culture, history, 22 official languages officially, and birthplace of everything from sort of yoga to chess to, partnerships in cinema from Bollywood. But India and Australia. So diving into India and the fact that, it has one of the largest and longest, it takes 6 weeks for the Indian elections to occur. Obviously, one of the largest elections in the world. They elect 443 seats in their lower house, which we've spoken about on previous episodes, and have an appointed upper house. The current Prime Minister, Narendra Modi from BJP, and the opposition is INC, or the Indian National Congress. So, Erin, what's your love, connection and engagement with India, a population of 968 million voters out of 1.4 billion people?
To give some context to this conversation, I think that I have been to India something like over 50 or 60. I stopped counting, but like 50 or 60 times. So some context here that I've spent an awful lot of time there. I went there in 2012 for the first time as a very naive but eyes wide open intern. I was interning at UN SCAP, which is the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, South and Southwest Asia office in New Delhi. And when I was there, it was an incredibly challenging experience the first time. This is before we all, we had the connectivity that we have today. It was pre some of the transitions that India's been through, which I can talk about. But India was a very, very different place. And I remember coming home really, really angry. It was the December 16 gang rape in which Jyoti Singh, she passed away in Singapore. You might remember that. And there were protests in the street, and it was such a violent crime, and I was very close to where I was living. I was very deeply affected by it, and I was so angry. My plane was delayed in Malaysia, and I ended up having to wait overnight in Malaysia, and I just remember bursting into tears. And this woman came up to me. She said, "I work for the Australian government. I can help you." And she gave me her business card, and I stopped crying and whatever. I always remember that. That we in a previous episode, you asked, what's the role of, a consulate? That is like a consular service that she was trying to sort of reach out to me in that really awful situation. Yeah. Anyway, so I came back to Australia, and because there was so much negative media about India at the time, I then felt really defensive. So I decided to set up a business and run tours to India for Australian students, which I then did right up until COVID. And so that was my first ever business and my first ever sort of entrepreneurial experience. And so, and then since then really transitioned into more business oriented roles, and I did think tank roles there. And I travel a lot with one of the Indian think tanks. Observer Research Foundation to many places around the world. So very heavily engaged with India. And then I married a Sri Lankan as well. And if we think about the region, so got a lot of sense of what's going on about the subcontinent.
We met as well, interestingly enough.
You and I met through the Australia-India Youth Dialogue. You famously came out in a surf lifesaving outfit, which involved red budgie smugglers, and that was about it.
I think I had a cap on as well.
Possibly. If we were lucky.
Yeah, that was a very worthwhile program that encourages leadership back and forth between Australia and India. So
and surf lifesaving, right?
And surf lifesaving is another big program encouraging water safety across India as well.
But what I would say about India is in the time since I first went in 2012, now fast forward, it's 2026, that country has just radically changed. Australia's relationship has radically changed. We used to have very little trade with India, and now every year we're seeing increases, from 2020 to 2026, $10 billion increase in trade. We obviously have our ECTA, which is the Economic Partnership Agreement with India as well. So that sort of liberalises some elements of our trade.
Quad.
Both were in the Quad, which is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or I think they just call it the Quad these days, which is India, the US, Japan, and Australia. And so we have a lot more military and defence cooperation, which is obviously really great. But I want to kind of contextualise the changes in India, because when I first went there, Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. This was pre-Narendra Modi, and the politics has enormously changed, obviously with the Janata Party winning and Narendra Modi becoming Prime Minister. Now, I sit on the fence with Modi, because on one hand, there are some things that he does that I don't particularly like. But on the other hand, some of the things that he has done around the economy and digitisation is just absolutely phenomenal and world-leading. And now I would say they are comfortably sit in the position of leaders of the global south when it comes to how you approach the digital economy. So they've got this thing called the India Stack. Have you heard of it?
No. Tell us a bit more
so the India Stack is basically an approach to digitising identity, payments and data storage, and then you can deliver a whole range of other services that kind of extend beyond that. So in 2016, Narendra Modi said, I'm going to take all of this currency out of circulation. He demonetized, it was called. And I was like, so you're taking away cash from poor people, which was one of the very short-term effects of this happening. But basically what he was doing is saying, I'm going to take all of this money out of the economy that is fraudulent, because there was huge issues around corruption at the time and sort of, fraudulent currency and so on. But then what happened is he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring everybody in India onto one digital ID system. And I suppose like the upside of the kind of democracy that they are and the kind of democratic leader he is, read between the lines, is that he can go, this is what you're all doing. There's no political argument about it. We are all getting digital identity. It's called the Aadhaar system. Now the entire country, something like 98% of the country is on Aadhaar. So everybody has a digital ID. So that's like your foundational layer. Second to that is a payment system and unified payments interface, which instead of being some proprietary data the bank owns, it's like our national payments platform. It is open source APIs that mean that anybody who wants to set up a payments gateway
can do so,
right? So then in August 2025, if my memory serves me right, 68% of transactions in India happen on UPI. So and the philosophy, and then you've got a data storage component on top of that, which data matches. Instead of you giving your data to Medibank or Optus, they kind of verify it instantly, and then they don't keep the data.
Advanced than Australia.
Way more advanced, way more advanced. But the underlying philosophy is if you bring the most marginalised into that system, you kind of lift up the whole financial system. And that's where you've seen India's economy grow to what it is today.
So it's no longer just what used to be the 3 C's of India's relationship with Australia.
Oh, you had to mention them. I thought we could get away with this podcast without mentioning. I hate it's such a
lame historical
it's so lame.
term.
But apparently in DFAT circles is that if your answer is the curry, Commonwealth and cricket, then you're asking the wrong questions.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair call. And we have a huge Indian diaspora in Australia, almost a million or over a million.
It's been our largest source of migrants.
Of Indian background in Australia, and a country very close to both of us. And Australia actually started its trade relationship with India in 1941, before India even had independence. Independence for India, as we've spoken about on a previous episode, is actually the same day as Australia Day, so the 26th of January.
Correct, yes.
But they became independent in 1947.
Correct.
And both Erin and I have been to India on a couple of occasions, and Erin's partner's from Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka's one of my favourite destinations in the world. I think Sri Lanka, while separate to India, is worth an episode in and of itself in a future edition of the podcast.
Well, I think that's very interesting, Neil, because it's actually, if we talk about India and we talk about the geopolitics of the region, which are, India's number one priority from a foreign policy perspective and a defence and military perspective is Pakistan. But let's not go into that conversation because I think that again is its own podcast in and of itself. But if you look at Sri Lanka, for example, with India, if you look at the economic crisis, the political crisis, the country that has come and really stepped in to support Sri Lanka has been India. And so that relationship is really, really strong. And it goes to show India's sort of leadership role. And obviously Sri Lanka is very strategic to India. Sort of they call it like the teardrop of the Indian Ocean because it sort of sits on the end of India there as this, beautiful, or maybe it's the pearl teardrop, kind of same beautiful thing anyway.
The old country of Ceylon.
Ceylon it was called.
For a long, long time.
Yeah. So India has this really, obviously it's immediate strategic leadership role, but India's role globally has fundamentally changed. Now, listeners here who are interested in India, I highly recommend that you go and listen to External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, who's sort of their equivalent of a foreign minister. Jaishankar, the way that he articulates the way in which India thinks about the world, you can see why Narendra Modi pulled him into that role. So Jaishankar and Samir Saran, who is the president of Observer Research Foundation, you can find them all over Instagram and have a little look around. The way they articulate how India because we talked about complexities around, say, like Eastern Europe and Russia and so, but the way in which they think about their multi-alignment, they don't say they're not, everyone goes, oh, India, they say they're not aligned. They don't, they say they're multi-aligned. And they do, but people often challenge it, right? So I recommend people go and listen to Samir Saran and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar to really hear how India thinks about the world. Because if you want to understand it, that's it. The books that I think are really good for people to read are like Shashi Tharoor's books. He articulates in his book Inglorious Empire what the British did to India is such a great book. It's one of my favourite books of all time.
And it's a very complex history. So even before the British and the rise of sort of some of the micro-states and the British Raj and these sorts of bits and pieces, it was occupied by a period of time by Islamic conquerors and sort of...
There were the Mughals. There's this whole history.
In between.
But I think the thing that defines India today, if you want to understand India, one, you're going to have to spend your entire lifetime there to do that. First step, accept that you'll never understand India. But second step is to, like that book I mentioned from Shashi Tharoor is a good one, but really look at because everyone's like, oh, we want free trade agreements with India, and everyone criticises the limitations of those agreements. Well, India has a way of thinking about the world that is really a legacy of its own colonisation. After its independence, it nationalised assets. When I wrote my PhD, which was on women entrepreneurs from India, I heard a lot about these stories of when many of the people I interviewed were Anglo-Indians, and the stories of their families after independence and those, say, if they worked for British American Tobacco, which then became Imperial Tobacco, which then became, I can't remember the name that it became after that. But anyway, you see the pattern there. The idea that you could fast forward 70 years and Australia is going to go, it's a liberalised trade. That's not really how it works. And the other thing is internally you can see how India has really struggled to liberalise its trade domestically to enable more access, say, for example, with the farmers, and everyone would have seen in the media the farmers' protests that have happened over the years. So you've got to really look at that independence movement. You've got to look at the decolonisation process, the nationalisation process, and I think that really helps you to understand more why perhaps can't we get to where we want to on certain sectors, and why can't we get what we want in this part of the relationship, and it all kind of goes back to that. I mean, India is very sort of careful, I think, of its now really heightened economic role in the world, and they are very fearful. I don't think fearful is the right word, but they're like, no, hang on, we've been down this path before.
Cautious.
And they're cautious. They are cautious, yeah, I think so.
It's interesting. I really enjoy my visits to India, but they're just such a full-on, in whether you're in Mumbai or Delhi.
Have you been to an Indian wedding?
I have been to a Sri Lankan wedding, not an Indian one.
They're a bit different.
Bit different.
Depends if it was Hindu or if it was... Again, like Sri Lanka's a land of many as well.
Mixed case.
Did you go to a multi-day wedding?
It was a multi-day wedding.
Saying.
Multi-day, 3 days, not the full
that's
5
small.
or 7.
Okay.
3 days was an Australian abbreviation of a Sri Lankan wedding. But one of the interesting sides of it with India, which I always say to friends who are going there, is India is an absolute blast for every sense you could imagine. Sight, sound, smell, like everything.
Lonely Planet calls it an assault on the senses, and everybody recycles that term. But it's kind of right.
That's what it is. And like when you're there, it's probably, and I've been to probably about 80 different countries. Erin and I both enjoy our travel. But India is one of the few countries in the world where I'm like, okay, it's 3:00 in the afternoon. I just need to go back to my hotel. I need to close the curtains. I need to have a shower. And I just need an hour of nothing. No sound, no light, no noise, no smells. And then I can pick up again and, ride off the
That's really
evening.
interesting. I mean, I'm past that era. When I first went there, 100%. What I used to do is for kicks, this was like my idea of a thrill, is I'd go down to Chandni Chowk and I'd walk through Canary Bazaar and Wedding Street, and I'd go to my favourite paratha place and my favourite jeweler, and then I'd walk out the other end.
Stunning.
Oh my gosh, the food's amazing. And then I'd walk out the other end and I'd just be like, whoa. And like Chandni Chowk has changed because now they've paved it. It's all very different to not very different, but it's a bit sort of neater than it was 15 years ago. And then I'd get to the other end and I'd go, okay, I need to somehow get to Horsecast Village, which is this area that has no cars in it. And I'd go to this little Tibetan restaurant that was there, go to the top where I'm sure they were selling beers illegally. And I'd just sit there and I'd just drink this one beer and be like, whoa, what just happened? Now I don't need to do that, but certainly at the time that was like
a bit of culture shock into India.
100%. But what was interesting is I first went to Nepal, which is another really like the geopolitics of Nepal. I first
went to Nepal before India as well.
And so when I got to India and I got to New Delhi airport, I was like, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting something, I don't know, like, because Nepal's airport is really like it's
rudimentary.
It's rudimentary is the right way to call it, and so that's kind of what I was expecting in India. But actually, I got to India and there was so much wealth, particularly in Delhi and Bombay. The airports are absolutely stunning, and if you want to go like. Last time, I'm just, this is a little bit snobby, but I'm going to say it anyway. Last time I was in Bombay, I was like, I want to go shopping and I want to, go to like the nice, like beautiful stores of South Bombay. And I went to Sabyasachi, which if anyone here watches the Met Gala might have remembered Shah Rukh Khan being dressed by Sabyasachi. And I think that the report had no idea who either of them were. And I was just like only the biggest Bollywood star of all time, but whatever. Or like probably movie star of all time because Bollywood is far bigger than anything else. So I went to Sabyasachi, which is like a museum of, of high fashion. I bought the only thing in the shop that I could afford, which is like a little pouch. And it's like my little flex because yesterday I was at a cafe and I had my Sabyasachi and I put it down and the guy who was like the waiter was an Indian guy. And I was like, I know he can see that that's a Sabyasachi. It's the Christian Dior. No, way posher, way cooler than that. Bali's like, because the thing is in India, there's so much wealth. It is
the
like
most expensive house in the world, $1 billion.
The Ambani house in South Bombay. Yeah. And so, some of these people will spend as much in a night that I'll spend in a year. I mean, the wealth is really, really extreme and it is very unequal. It remains very unequal. And so there are, it's all very well and good to go and enjoy these aspects of India that are like the hotels, the hospitality, absolutely phenomenal. Whenever I go there and I go to these big conferences, which are like the Taj Palace Hotel, and it's all very glamorous now. I'm not like when I first went when I had no money to my name. It's all very glamorous, but every year they have this conference called Raisina Dialogue and I say, right, WhatsApp group, who's coming with me? We're going to Old Delhi. We're going on my little tour that I walk people around on. Even Stephen Smith, our former foreign minister, a good Labor man like this Labor poster that we have behind me, which I've been dying to mention. Anyone who's on the video can see it here, which I think is signed by Gough Whitlam.
It is signed by Gough Whitlam.
And so anyway, we have to acknowledge that. But yes, Stephen Smith has come on that walk with me. I really try and I want people to get out of the hotel because if you want to understand India, if you want to understand the economy, you have to know the price of a bag of onions.
Yeah.
And you're not going to learn that sitting in Chanakapuri at a beautiful hotel.
So my last couple of things before we go to do we think that Modi has passed the pub test in India? Because I'm going to ask Erin these questions. And given that Modi does not drink alcohol, he's a tea, water and health drink connoisseur, being a vegan.
Some Ayurvedic.
We're going to say, would you go for a drink with Modi? But my little last couple of facts on India and my bit of experience when I was over there, I was very lucky in Mumbai. I did a tour of downtown Mumbai and was introduced to the Zoroastrianism religion, of which they have this massive park in the middle of downtown Mumbai called, anecdotally, the Lungs of Mumbai, because there's this huge area of greenery in downtown Mumbai. Now, interestingly enough, this park was actually originally set up as a vulture park because the Zoroastrians believe that when you die, your body should be put up and the vultures should pick it apart.
That's right, yes.
And so sadly, over time, the vultures passed away, but the park, which is now the Lungs of Mumbai, still looked after by the Zoroastrians, is in the middle of downtown Mumbai. Now, before I flick to the more political angle of who would you have a drink with and has Modi passed the pub test, I'm going to take a turn, just like on the Monarchy where I was all serious and Erin went down this fashionable pathway of, the princess and her fashion. I'm going to talk about the fact that Nick Jonas's wife is Priyanka Chopra.
Oh, PC, yeah.
The amazing actress, stunningly beautiful, and I say that as an openly gay guy, and a brilliant actor, and really kind of has put Indian Bollywood, which is the largest movie centre globally, on the world stage. So look, I'm less keen. I'd still have a drink with Modi. It wouldn't be alcohol. It would be his water or tea. And I'll let Erin do the has he passed the pub test. But I'll tell you who I would love to catch up is Priyanka and Nick in India. I think that would be pretty stunning from my side. So Modi, pass the pub test, up for a drink. What's your thoughts?
Oh, of course, I'm going to have some chai tea with tea. I'm going to have a cup of tea with Modi. Of course. I mean, it depends on how you look at it, right? And we talk earlier on this podcast about depending, where you stand, depending on where you sit. And if you look at what he has done in terms of exerting India's influence in the world, in terms of bringing his people up economically, he's done a fantastic job. Are there some questionable things? Sure. I'd like to have a chat with him about that. I'd love to understand how he sees Pakistan, how he sees 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to understand that. But who do I actually want to hang out with? Deepika Padukone and Ranveer Singh, her husband. I know, Bollywood royalty.
There is
absolute royalty. Do you know? I have to admit,
that. I think for both of us, interestingly enough.
Yeah, I love it. I've watched so many Bollywood films. I really obsess about things every now and then, and Bollywood is one of them. That was one of the ways. It was like my gateway to kind of understanding India was starting to watch Bollywood films, and obviously, I mean, I've learned little bits of Hindi along the way, but I kind of lose it when I leave. So, I watch everything in what do you call it, closed captions. But I love a good Bollywood film, some of the old ones, some of the new ones. But I did get to see Kareena Kapoor once at Taj Land's End, whereas if you're ever in Mumbai, all the Bollywood stars have their events and stuff at Taj Land's End, so go there.
And there is a unique Australian-Indian film that's not quite Bollywood, but has lent into this space. It was it starred Nicole Kidman, an Australian biographical drama series called Lion in 2016. So for those of you
that was Dev Patel, wasn't it, who did that one?
It was Dev Patel. Yeah, it was Dev Patel.
There's a bunch of these films that if you're not really able to take that leap all the way to Bollywood, which I can give you some recommendations if you want to. Some of them, Happy New Year, fantastic. PK, fantastic. I think they're really accessible to non-Indian audiences.
But if you're not fully into Bollywood,
if you're not fully into
of
Slumdog Millionaire, Lion, I think that those are really good films for you to sort of, kind of make that first little step in.
And definitely worth a visit. Wherever you are in Australia and at least once in your lifetime, you need to get to India. And I'd add Sri Lanka to that list as well.
Of course, you've got to go to Sri Lanka. Absolutely. In fact, you could fly Sri Lankan Airlines direct from...
part of One World.
You know what? I think Sri Lankan Airlines and Virgin should sponsor this podcast because they're the two that we've talked. Well, the Qantas was there for a little bit, wasn't there?
Qantas I'm less enamoured with. But, Sri Lankan Airlines I do.
Sri Lankan Airlines, it is the fastest way to Bombay
and the
from Melbourne.
Way to Europe, interestingly enough.
Yes, you basically fly direct from here to Colombo, 2 hours up to Bombay. It's a really, really good way to go. Now, I'm going to get in trouble from some people for calling it Bombay, but the thing is that people from Mumbai, who are from Mumbai, they call it Bombay, and so I just sound really colonial, but it's not my intention. The other people I want to have a drink with, you talked about is it Astrozarian? I always get that wrong.
The Zoroastrian.
Yes, I was getting confused with, anyway.
Which is Tata Group.
They're
Tata
Parsi,
Group.
right? They're Parsi. So I'm
Originally
actually
from Iran.
I am actually going tonight to have a drink with a Parsi friend
you
of
go.
mine. So I would like to have a drink with them and have a chat. And another Mumbaiker who is from South Mumbai as well. So they're married.
There you go.
And so I'm having a drink with them in Melbourne.
One of the oldest religions on the planet has a strong presence in Mumbai and India. So on this episode of the pub test, we've touched on what's happening in South Australia, a little bit about the tremendously sticky monarchy that we have here, and touched on one of our favourite topics, India and Australia. Thanks for joining us again, and we look forward to speaking to you next time on the pub test.
Cheers to that. This podcast is brought to you by Baker York. We're an international public policy consulting firm that helps you navigate the Asia-Pacific region.